Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Communication in the Arts Alumni Panel discussion, sponsored by the Career Center and the College of Communication in the Arts at Seton Hall University. My name is Emmanuel Vozos. I'll be your moderator today. I'm an alum of the school, and currently I am the Director of Digital Media Production at Kean University. I also run American Octopus Productions, my own media production shop, and I've worked in television production on Law & Order, The Good Wife, and Bored to Death, among other things. I'm going to be moderating today's discussion with an illustrious alumni panel who are all professionals in the broadcasting and communication fields, television, film, radio, Sirius satellite, across other platforms, podcasts, across the table. We're happy to welcome recent graduates, current students, incoming freshmen, and other guests in today's audience. And we look forward to hearing from you during our Q&A. Using our Microsoft Teams platform, there's a Q&A function where you can add your questions. The way today's program is going to go, we're going to hear from all of our alumni one-on-one, and then we're going to have time for what I hope will be a lively Q&A session afterwards, where your questions will be asked and all our different alumni will be able to respond to them. Before we begin our one-on-one, I want to establish what today's topics are going to cover and what our theme is. We're going to talk about starting your career via internships, via first jobs, getting your foot in the door and networking, and also evolving your career, growing it, how to make connections, how to spot an opportunity, and how to climb a ladder or change directions if you need to. Our alumni guests have all spent a lot of time since college working on their careers and growing them in different ways, and I think they represent not only a variety of different types of media, but also their different experiences represent a lot of the types of choices that you might face in your career as you develop it, and their example might be helpful to you all in the audience as you start your careers. So we're really excited to bring this to you guys today, and we're all very grateful that you're in the audience. Before we begin our one-on-ones, I want to briefly go around the room and introduce our panel. With us today is Mike Maniaci from the class of 2007. Mike Maniaci is the Vice President of Development for BSTV Entertainment, and he has a large career of unscripted media behind him. Mike has worked on programs for Bravo, Animal Planet, MTV, Nat Geo, and the Weather Channel, among many others. Good morning, Mike, and thank you for being here.
Good morning, Manny. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. We're so glad you're here, Mike. Next up, we'll also have Gabby Utermark. Gabby is the script supervisor at the Rachel Ray Show and started her career there as an intern. She's got a very unique experience developing her career through one mainstay program. Gabby, thank you for being here. Looking forward to talking to you. Good morning.
Thank you for having me. This is great. Thanks so much for organizing it.
Absolutely. Also on our panel today, we've got Danny Schock from the class of 2009. Danny is an actor and a stuntman, most recently seen in Joker and The Irishman, as well as appearances on Law & Order SVU. He began his career in the locations department and realized how he wanted to become an actor and a stuntman, and we're going to talk to Danny today about that evolution. Good morning, Danny, and welcome to our panel.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Also on our panel today, we've got Nicole Romanella O'Neill. Nicole is our two-time Emmy-winning supervising producer, having worked on programs such as The Dr. Oz Show for 9 seasons, The Today Show, and The Mel Robbins Show. Nicole, welcome to our panel, and thank you for being here today.
Hi, happy to be here.
Thank you. Looking forward to talking with you. Next up, we have Chris Colbert, also from the class of 2007. Chris is the founder and CEO of DCP Entertainment, formerly the Vice President of Programming for Cadence 13, and for many years, the Director of Urban Talk and Comedy for Sirius XM Radio. Chris, welcome to our panel. Thanks for making time today.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Rounding out our panel, we have Mr. Paul Ward from the class of 1986. Paul is a public relations and brand consultant under his own shingle, PW Strategic Communications LLC, and formerly the Executive Vice President at Nickelodeon, running Nick at Night for many years. Paul, welcome to our panel. Thank you for being here today.
Manny, thanks for having me.
Excellent. Ladies and gentlemen in the audience, that is our panel, and we're really excited to speak with you all today. We're going to get started with Mike Maniaci. Mike, once again, is our VP of Development at BSTV Entertainment, working on developing unscripted programming all across different genres. Mike, tell us a little bit about what a VP of Development does.
Sure. So development, which is a little different than production that we can talk about in a little bit, but my job is essentially the sales force for the production company. I am tasked with ideating, creating, finding talent to pitch various buyers, and that could be the streamers like Netflix and Amazon. It could be cable networks, broadcast networks, and digital entities as well. So we take that nugget of an idea that may have come out of a brainstorm and stretch it out into something that can be seen on television and actually sell it and produce it alongside the networks. That's basically development in a small snapshot.
So in the development of a TV show, you are coming up with the idea and you're coming up with a plan for how that idea might come to fruition. And then at a certain point, production is taken on by a different unit. Is that right?
Yes. Sometimes with various production companies, what we do to make a seamless transition from development to production, the development executives may stay on for the first season of a show. But yes, once that show is sold, we try to hand it off as soon as possible so we can get started on other things to sell.
So before you began in unscripted entertainment, you actually started your career working, interning, and then working in late night comedy for the the Late Show with David Letterman. Can you tell us a little bit about how you started with Dave and how that led to the next part of your career?
Sure. So the spring semester of my senior year, I actually moved home, born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, back home with my family to do a full-time internship at the Late Show with David Letterman. So actually begrudgingly left campus early, but it was a great opportunity. It was 5 days a week to work as a production assistant on the show. It was a big deal for me because obviously I was a big fan of the show, but it was also shot at the Ed Sullivan Theater in New York City, which is a building that has a lot of television history in it. And my father actually worked there as a CBS page when he started out. So it was a big deal for me to get that internship. So we would do tapings every day, twice on Mondays. It was a crash course in both production and comedy, kind of seeing things happen and brainstorm in the morning and then shot later at 4 o'clock that day. It was pretty wild. And to kind of see it all through the lens of like a David Letterman type, who was a risk taker and a broadcaster, was a lot of fun. I remember vividly my graduation from Seton Hall was a Monday, and I was actually afraid to take off and asked to take off because it was a double tape day, and they said, you should probably go to graduation. But as soon as the internship was done, I was actually offered a production assistant and researcher position for a documentary that Dave's production company, which was housed in the same building, Worldwide Pants Incorporated, they were working on some non-scripted programming and a documentary about young kids running for political office in America. So it was basically my job to find kids 18 to 20 years old that were running for mayors in major metropolitan cities and city councils and things like that. So that's how it kind of transitioned from the internship to production.
So I think that it's good fortune that another show or another program was staffing up as your first one was ending, but that's not that people don't just go walking up to interns and saying, I want you to work for me now. Talk a little bit about how you see an opportunity like that and say, okay, I'm going to pursue that. Now I'm here for this, but next I want to do that. How did you make that jump?
Sure. So I learned within the first week at the Late Show that, I was kind of an outsider coming in, right? They had been on the air for many years prior. They were a well-oiled machine. So it was really my job to just lay low, listen, ask questions when I could, but just learn and observe. And through that, you kind of gain the respect and trust of the people above you. It was one of those things that I tried to just be a sponge and absorb as much as I could. And when they brought me in after I had graduated, I actually thought I was getting fired from the internship. They brought me into the office and they just said, listen, we like what you've been doing. We know you want to stay in comedy and stay in scripted and at the Late Show. We don't have anything open at the moment. Would you be interested in this? And I was like, I'm not saying no. This is still working with Dave. That's awesome. So for me, it was just an opportunity to diversify my resume, do something different, but I could still stick around in the Ed Sullivan Theater, I was a kid in a candy shop. I would still sneak around the studio when I would take a break and end up on the stage. And to me, just being exposed to that every day, that was well worth it. It was supposed to be a 2-week gig, and it ended up being a year and a half. And I think, listen, it was right place, right time, a lot of luck, but I also didn't screw it up either. So it's one of those things that you try to I always tell people when you make a contact and they like your work, they're going to tell 3 other people about you. And that's how you kind of grow your network. So as long as you keep your head down, do the work hard, stay late, do the hours, people will take notice, and there may be new opportunities that arise in a couple of weeks or months, or depending on the end of your gig.
Right on. Before we wrap up with this portion of the one-on-one, Mike, would you briefly talk a little bit about how, what about development stood out, and how we talked earlier, and you talked a little bit about how you worked on both sides of the casting and both sides of the development worlds. Can you speak a little bit about that before we wrap up?
Sure. So part of the documentary that I was working on with Dave, it was my job to find these kids. And once I did that and found a couple of key candidates that we actually were shown in the documentary, this was around the same time where unscripted documentaries and reality TV at the time was leaning towards more character-driven stuff like Pawn Stars and American Pickers. So once that happened, and I was kind of looking at the situation, oh well, I could cast for this very focused thing. What if I could cast in other arenas and try to pitch and sell? So that was kind of my leap into development, because I really didn't know what development was, and I pivoted that experience at Dave to a production company that specialized in nonfiction, but they taught me the ropes of development. It wasn't just about having a great idea and be able to flesh it out. It was about, connections and pitching and the dynamics of being in a room and pitching to the best of your abilities. And it's also like past the pitch meeting, what you do in the follow-up. So that's kind of how it transitioned from production to development for me.
Very good. Guys, we're going to do our Q&A later, so if you have questions for Mike about casting, development, comedy, etc., make sure to put them in the Q&A box, and we'll address them later on. I want to introduce our next guest. Thank you very much, Mike. I want to introduce our next guest, Gabby Utermark. She's been at the Rachel Ray Show for many years, since actually starting there as an intern, and that's a very unique experience in the world of TV production. It's also a very unique experience in the world of interning. So as many of you students out there are going to get started with your career, I want to talk to Gabby about turning an internship into a full-time position and growing that position into the area of production that you like, and how you find that when you're on a set. So Gabby, how are you?
Hi, good. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good.
Good.
Tell us a little bit about how you actually started at Rachel Ray, which I believe began at an internship fair or a career fair. Is that right?
No, but we'll get to that.
Okay.
So I just want to hit on interning in general. I did 3 while I was at Seton Hall. I did 1 my junior year and 2 my senior years. And I know I wouldn't have a job out of college if I didn't do that. So I just want to stress, if you can, to absolutely take advantage and try and do it multiple times in multiple fields if you can. My plan was to do 3 different types. Am I still here?
Mm-hmm.
I lost you guys.
No,
my plan was to do I did Fox News, I did a daytime talk show, and my plan was to do a 3rd. I ended up doing 2 daytime talk shows because I really liked it. I was at Regis and Kelly as well. But my plan was to try different things because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. But I did the news, and I hated the news, and I knew I was not set up for a career in the news. So that, I'm happy I did it. I'm happy I had the experience, and I just didn't like it. So it was great though, because I learned I'm not going to go that path. And then I did Regis and Kelly. Really liked daytime. So then I took another one in daytime, Rachel Ray, and lucky for me, just like Mike, it was right place, right time. And the day after graduation, I was there full time.
Wow. So you started out as an intern at Rachel Ray, and what kind of work were you doing at the beginning? This is also the really early going of a show.
Yes, it was season 1.
Yeah.
And in the first season, it's very different than it's. Like Mike was saying, he went into Letterman, which was such a well-oiled machine. And I went to a startup show, and that's really hard. It's very long hours, and everyone's just getting their bearings. Nobody knows, if it's going to work or if it's going to get picked up. It's a very low budget. So it was great to go into something for a season because I got to do a lot of things that, that were just being tested. And then season 2 rolled around and they got picked up for 2 years, so they had to staff up. So it was so much of TV is right place, right time, but it's also putting yourself into that position that, when they need a staff, you're there.
Mm-hmm. We've talked one-on-one, and you talked about the importance of your PA season as an opportunity to try different departments and different duties. Can you talk a little bit about how something like that comes up?
Yeah, so that was the job I was offered after my internship, was to be a production assistant, and there were 5 of us, and I used that year, and you can PA, it's a great stepping stone into the television world, any world, but I was hoping to do it for a year or 2. I ended up only doing it for a year, but many people do it 2-3 years before they kind of get the next thing. But I used my year as a PA, which was a really, really strenuous year. I remember it was so many hours and places and odd things I had to do. But I used that year, and I didn't know what path I wanted to go in, and I didn't know where I wanted to end up. So I used that year to shadow as many different people in as many different jobs and departments as I could. So I just actually wrote a list of who I shadowed. I shadowed our director and AD in the control room. I went on field shoots. I sat with editors in post and I watched them edit down shows. I shadowed a stage manager, a lighting director. I shadowed producing teams, like creative producing teams. I worked in the audience department. I did anything I could to get a feel for where I wanted to head, in the following years of my career. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know, it wasn't me searching for something. The executive producer of the show actually found me and said, this is what you should be doing. It wasn't me I actually didn't find what I was looking for that year until someone above me noticed, and said, I know what you should be doing. And they led me in that direction, which was the script department. Mm-hmm.
Right. They saw you on a field shoot, right? And then they said,
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, if you like that, or if you're good at taking notes and being diligent and being organized, you might be good for the script department."
Mm-hmm. That's exactly what happened. I hadn't gotten to my script round yet, and it was someone who said, you're very organized, and we could really use you, helping us take edit notes and things like that, and that led me to script. Yeah.
Now, did they have it structured that way, where they were like, you're going to do 2 weeks here, or an episode here, episode there, or you said, I want to try this, I want to try that?
Nope, that was me. I was just I went on plenty of coffee runs, but when I saw an opportunity and I knew a field shoot was coming up, I said, I would like to go. I drove cargo vans. I was, willing to do whatever I need, do I love driving cargo vans? No. But I did it because I wanted to go on that field shoot, and I wanted to, do whatever I could to have different experiences at the beginning of my career.
And that type of energy, sort of finding an opportunity, seeing it coming, and saying, I would like that opportunity, and not being afraid of mm-hmm. being outspoken about that. Did that also help you as you were climbing the ladder, as you stuck around for many seasons, and as the show climbed, and as people mm-hmm. changed roles? Ideally, everybody's sort of moving up as this startup becomes a hit. And mm-hmm. did that type of persistence help you become the script supervisor on the show?
Yes, I think you definitely can't be shy in TV. I think you have to kind of put yourself out there, and you have to, once you get your foot in the door, there's so many different directions you can go, and you have to be outspoken about what you want, and you have to be confident and just go for it.
Perfect.
I mean, the thing is, people aren't like the director of the show. He's not going to approach you and say, you want to shadow me one day? You have to go up to him and say, I'm really interested in what you do. Can I sit with you just for they're not going to say no.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you, Gabby. Folks, put your questions in the Q&A, and we will come back to Gabby and Mike and all of our panelists a little bit later on. Next up, we're going to talk to Danny Schock. Danny is our actor and stuntman, class of 2009. Danny, you were a theater major at Seton Hall, correct? And you turned into an actor, so that worked out really, really well, but it wasn't directly. I know that you took a non-traditional approach to getting your early work experience. You actually took a gap year during your college education to go to Hollywood and work on film sets, right?
Forgot to unmute myself.
There you go.
I'm not one of the technical guys, okay? I'm in front of the camera most of the time, so this is new to me. But yeah, that's right. I took a year off after my freshman year, and I kind of looked around and said, I've been going to school for 13 years in a row. I think I want to try something else, and so I thought I always wanted to work in films, and I figured where's the best place to do that? That's Hollywood. So I went out there and worked for a year. I was an editor's assistant at a post-production house out there. So I was basically, logging footage and putting in like a skeleton kind of edit for things before the final editor would come in and do his brush up or her brush up, And I learned a lot there just about what goes into even just in post-production, let alone what goes into pre and production itself. So I learned a lot doing that. But when I decided to come back to Seton Hall, I'm really glad I did, because coming back, I met obviously Chris and Mike and Gabby and you, Manny, and I met some really great and talented people, similar thinking people like me about, putting ourselves out there. And they said, right place, right time. And I couldn't agree more, but it's about putting yourself in the right place and the right time. So like Gabby said, no one's going to ask you if you want the next job. So you do have to kind of go after it and go get the next one on your own. But I'm glad I learned that at Seton Hall. So I'm glad I came back, and it was worth it.
Well, speaking of spotting the next thing and deciding you're going to pursue it, I think one of the more interesting parts of your career, one that I actually witnessed firsthand as we worked together at Law and Order, was you deciding. We were both locations assistants working on set to help set up all the different field shoots for the program, and you decided, well, that's not enough. I want to continue to pursue acting, and I think stunting is the way to go. And you sort of made that happen. You willed that to happen through connections and through being in the right place and creating the right place. So can you talk a little bit about transitioning from being a full-time locations set person into being a stuntman, and actually there's a lot of sacrifice involved in starting to turn down days doing one thing in order to pursue another. And I'd like to hear you talk about that a little bit if you could.
Yeah. So when you look at, I guess the real question you have to ask yourself is sort of like, where do I want to end up? Like, what do I want to be at the end? In film production, it's similar, I guess, to TV, but it's different in a way that there's like that there's everybody's constantly changing jobs, back and forth. And when I looked at the future of a location person, and it'd be a location assistant, and then there'd be an assistant location manager, and then a location manager, and then after that you might become a UPM, a unit production manager, and then eventually a producer of some sort. And it just seemed like I don't want to do any of those jobs. So I didn't want to be, maybe a producer someday or something interesting like that. Maybe like to produce someday, but I didn't want to do all those middle steps. And I realized I'd be putting my life on hold, I think, while I went through all of those steps just to get to an ending point that I might like. So I think what I did instead is I looked around like Gabby did. I looked around on set and saw, the props department and the costumes department and the grip and electric and the camera department and all the different departments that help put a show together, put a TV show or a movie together. And I immediately noticed the stunts department. I mean, it was like a light went off in my head, and I was just like, oh my God, like this is where all the fun is happening. I mean, these guys get to, drive the cars and shoot the guns and get in fights and go downstairs and go out windows and all that kind of stuff. And what I like the most about it, what drew me the most, I think, is it is very much a crew department. It's not just in front of the camera. It is very much like you're working with production to make things safe, and you're working with production to make things logistically happen. Like, we need to rent this kind of equipment, or we need to lock off this kind of street, this way, so we can make this thing happen safely. And then, like almost on the turn of a dime, you're really on the other side of the camera, and then you have to perform. And so it's like the two sides of me that I really enjoyed, of putting on a show and then and then performing in that show. And so also, growing up playing sports and things like that, it was a natural reaction, I think, for me to say, I want to be in a physical performing role in a film set. And so, I mean, it was well worth it. And it was sort of like taking a lateral jump, It was like I'm leaving a location department where there's a ladder that I could rise in if I wanted to, or I could jump across to this other ladder of stunts, which is no guarantee by any means. And there's no guaranteed money. There's no, guarantee that I'm going to get hired. I mean, and like you said, turning down other work to focus on that was very, very hard. And so I made this lateral jump, and I was able to rise somewhat in that arena.
I think it's perfect and perfectly appropriate for you to describe jumping from one ladder to another, to use a stunt to describe entering the stunt industry.
There were no mats underneath.
Yeah, exactly. Jumping without a net.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit more about that, though? I think knowing when to say no to one opportunity in order to pursue another opportunity is something that maybe people in our audience might not face that in terms of performing versus working behind the scenes, but that type of choice is going to present itself in some different ways to everybody along the way in their career, where you have to, in order to affect change, you have to say no to one thing to pursue another. So can you just, before we wrap up, I'd like to hear you talk a little bit more about what that type of decision takes.
Yeah, it's a very personal decision. It's about you in your time. At the right time for you is the right time to do it. And like as an example, like before I was getting married, people were saying, it's never the right time and there's never enough money. So it's like, you might as well do it. And that's sort of where I was at with this too. It was sort of like, I don't want to do this anymore, what I'm doing. I'm not happy doing it. And I don't want to continue to grow in this world that I don't find interesting and I didn't want to do anymore. So, and it was more like, to speak on the networking and making the jump, because they're intertwined, right? Like you need to have enough people in your network that you can start to say, like, I'm going to do stunts now. I'm a stunt man now, And I was lucky enough to talk to work with a lot of great stunt coordinators as I was a locations person, but I was letting them know that I wanted to do stunts, like almost relentlessly, almost like to a point where they'd say, like, okay, leave me alone now. It was just shy of that. Like every morning this stunt coordinator would come, his name's Steve Pope. He's one of the best in the business. And he would come to work every morning, and I'd ask him every single morning at breakfast. I said, did all your guys show up today? And if he said, and he would always say, yeah, why? And I'd say, well, I was just wondering if you needed somebody extra. I could jump in there. I could do it, And he'd be like, okay, enough. Leave me alone. Get out of the way. I'm trying to get breakfast. So, it was to the point where he was almost annoyed by it. But then one day on set, he looked at me and he said, like, what do you weigh? How tall are you? Do you have a motorcycle license? And I said, yeah. And he hired me for a job. And it was a 3-day gig doing stunts for him on a movie. And it got me enough credits to get into the union. And so I joined the Screen Actors Guild that fall, and it was, running off from there. So, and then I didn't work again doing stunts for another year. So I was still doing locations back and forth. But every time I get a stunt day, I would jump on that, and eventually they started to outweigh each other, where I couldn't do locations anymore because I was getting too many calls for stunts. And that's when I felt like I'm not doing a service to the locations department I'm working on, and I'm not doing a service to myself by going full force into the stunt world. So I decided, okay, I'm just going to make that jump. And like I said, it was hard, really hard to find work and to keep, the paychecks coming in. But once people saw that I made that commitment to not to not hedging my bets, basically, they saw me like all the way in on stunts. They hired me more. They knew that
you were serious. Yeah.
Exactly. And so I think that's the real key, is just putting yourself out there, being honest with yourself, and being honest with everyone around you, what your intentions are. Try not to, you don't want to be the yes man to everybody, but you also don't want to be the no person. You want to be the person that comes up with solutions, and you want to be the one that can help them in their department accomplish their goals. which
Right.
is to make things safe and look great. And so that's where I fit right in. And so it was, that would be my advice to people is to be true and honest with yourself and everybody around you, and good things will come to you in that way.
Perfect. Thank you, Danny.
Yeah,
I think that's an important lesson to impart on everybody, no matter what your field is, to know what opportunities you want, to know what opportunities you want to be knocking, and then go make them knock for you. Everybody, put your questions in for Danny in the Q&A. We already have a nice couple of questions already in, and we're gonna talk about all of them later on. Next up on our alumni panel, I would like to introduce Nicole Romanella O'Neill. Nicole is a 2-time Emmy-winning supervising producer of daytime television, having worked on the Dr. Oz Show and the Today Show, and most recently the Mel Robbins Show. Nicole, thank you for being here today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely, welcome to our panel. So let's talk a little bit about your career evolution and getting started. And you started at CBS via a friend, is that right?
Yeah, so similar to Gabby, I am super passionate about internships. So I had 2 at Seton Hall, my junior year and my senior year. So my junior year internship came from just reaching out to anyone I knew in the industry and asking them if they could get me an internship. And my second internship came from the Career Center. It was a job fair. I saw a flyer in the communications building, and I went with my resume on the train and got my internship. And then both of those internships led to jobs.
Wow. You were at Regis and Kelly when you interviewed to be a part of the staff at Dr. Oz, is that right?
Correct. So it was the first, again, similar to Gabby, you get in on the ground level of a brand new show coming to New York, and that's what happened. I was a production assistant for Dr. Oz season 1, and then I stayed there for 9 seasons.
How does a production assistant grow to be a supervising producer? What was that path like?
So the path for me, one of the biggest things at Dr. Oz was that they asked for pitches. A lot of talk shows, daytime talk shows, they have the whole staff do pitches once a month for new segment ideas because you have a lot of segments to produce in daytime. It's a 7-segment show. And so they had asked for pitches from everyone on the staff. And so every 3 weeks, I would submit my pitches, and those went right to the executive producer. So even though the executive producer didn't necessarily know me, the bottom level production assistant, they started to see my ideas, and my ideas started to get produced. And so that's how I got noticed and moved my way up into producer. So that's one of my big tips is that if you do have a chance to submit your pitches, if you're working on a show or submit an idea, you know the fine line between being annoying, but also raising your hand and saying, I have this great idea. And that's one of the ways that I got noticed.
Yeah, that's something in common with your story, with Danny's story, and Gabby's, and I think probably everybody's on the panel is speak up. You know,
Yeah.
they let you in the door to be an intern or to be a PA, and that's how they find who's next in those other positions is people who speak up and people who show an investment in the success of the program, an investment in the success of the project. Tell me a little bit about what a supervising producer actually does for a program like that.
So the supervising producer is essentially considered a line producer in the control room. So pre-production, you have a team, you oversee all the scripts, all the writing, all the elements, how the show is going to come to fruition. You brief your host, and then the actual taping, you're in the control room, you're calling the elements to the director, you're on headset, on IFB with your talent, telling them when to wrap. If they should ask this question, you're in their ear. And then you're also communicating with your producers who are on the floor. You know, if the segment has to go in a different direction or something said that needs to be taken out quickly, you're communicating with everybody. And you're also keeping the time. And then you, as a supervising producer, you see that show all the way through post-production. So, you know, if your show taped an hour and a half, you have to get it down to 42 minutes, then it's also your job as a supervising producer to head into post and cut that show down the way you want it cut down.
Mm-hmm. The jump from Dr. Oz, a big, popular, fast-moving ship, over to the Today Show, an even bigger, larger longer running, 50 years or something like that program must have been pretty dramatic as well. Can you talk a little bit about where that change came from and why you wanted to make that jump?
Yeah, so I had been at Dr. Oz for 9 years and I had a great run there. And I think one of the things that we all have to do in our careers is look upwards and see if there's upward growth. And I got to a point at Dr. Oz where I was a producer for 5 years and I just didn't see that the opportunity was arising for me to go to that next level. And that's something that I really wanted. You know, the positions, they get smaller as you get to the top. So you have people that are in these positions for 30 years. I got a call from an old executive producer who was launching a new show in New York, and she offered me the supervising producer role. So I felt like leaving Dr. Oz, as much as I loved that show and as much as I loved the content, it was my only way to get to the next level.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that I think that we all see from time to time is you jump sideways, like Danny said too. You jump to a different ladder to keep climbing.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and you know, something about my story is that the show that I just got my supervising producer title on, the Mel Robbins Show, we got canceled after season 1, which is always a chance that you're going to take when you started a new show, but you often have to step down to step up. And so even though, you know, here I am, I left the Dr. Oz show, I left the Today Show, and now my show just got canceled, I would have never had that experience if I didn't take the leap, because now I have a whole nother skill set. So even though I feel a little like I'm floundering because I don't know what my next show is, I am so confident in myself for taking that next position. And I don't know if I would have gotten that opportunity at the Today Show for another 20 years or at Dr. Oz for another 20 years if I stayed there.
Right. I mean, the longevity of programs like Dr. Oz, the Today Show, even Rachel Ray and Law and Order SVU, some of the programs that some of this panel have worked on, those are the rarities. Like restaurants, TV shows start and run a little while and then close, and that's how a lot of programs go. And the movie business is exclusively like that, where there's an end date baked into it. If you work on a movie, you're working for 6 months, 8 months, whatever, and then it's over and you're waiting for the next thing. And so you don't know where those connections that you worked on last show, 2 shows ago, 3 movies ago, 4 internships ago, they're always going to come back. And Nicole, one of the things that you mentioned in our previous conversation was never leaving a place angry. And maintaining those relationships and maintaining those connections even when exiting or choosing a different opportunity.
So yeah, I think that. Yeah, I think that is really important. I think that in this industry, it's really easy to get fatigued if you get passed up for the promotion, or, you know, like Gabby said, some people can end up being a production assistant for 5-6 years and you get frustrated, and it's really easy to want to leave in a blaze of glory. But I think that the industry is very small, and even when I was frustrated, or even when, you know, I thought I was next in line to get promoted and I wasn't, it was really tempting to storm out or, you know, be upset. But every place I left, I always maintain my relationships, and I always still check in with the producers that left. And, you know, you see each other at the Emmys, or you see each other, you know, you see a different show gets nominated and you send out the text message and you say congratulations, because that's where all those jobs are going to come from next, is because everyone's leaving and starting new shows, and they're going to usually call their friends or the people that they worked with that they know can deliver. And that's going to be how the shows are staffed up. It's a lot like a sports team where the coach brings his best staff with him. And that's what happens at a TV show when they start up new shows. You know, you bring your people over with you, and that's why the relationships are really important.
Perfect. Very good. Nicole, thank you so much. We're gonna keep it moving, but we'll talk to Nicole and everybody again later on. Reminder for the Q&As. So next up, we're going to talk to Chris Colbert, another classmate of ours from the class of 2007. And Chris is the founder and CEO of DCP Entertainment, a media production company that specializes in podcasts and visual media as well. Chris was also formerly the director of urban talk and comedy for Sirius XM Radio for a number of years, and was vice president of programming for Cadence 13 before starting his own shop. Chris, how are you? Good afternoon, and welcome to our panel.
Doing good. I'm excited to tell you about how much better radio is than television and film.
I'm so glad. We've probably got a number of students here that are interested in radio and working at WSOU and the exploding podcast industry. So tell us a little bit about how you got started at Sirius, where you spent the early part of your career.
Yeah, much like a lot of people have said already, it came through the Career Center back when Sirius and XM were two different companies. Sirius was looking for interns, and they actually came to Seton Hall University and had a classroom open, and only 5 people actually showed up. Myself and 4 other members, all of us ended up getting internships. And I, in particular, was looking for a hip hop music internship, which was already filled up at that point. And they, asked if I wanted to try comedy, which is something that in the regular radio landscape I didn't know existed. This is just something that was unique to satellite radio. And so I just kind of took the chance and said, sure, I'll try out comedy. And so yeah, that's how I got my foot in the door as an intern for Sirius.
And once you were there, was being did that create a passion for the material? So you start working on something like Jamie Foxx's channel, The Foxhole, on Sirius, and that leads to more and more opportunities to climb that ladder. So how did that sort of change of direction of what you originally wanted lead to maybe more passion or a different opportunity?
Yeah. So to exactly what you said, it was kind of the kind of building blocks. So the internship, first attending the meeting, was kind of the first building block. Getting my internship was the next. But while being there, I did my first semester as a junior, my spring semester of junior year. And not realizing that I could only take 2 internships with them, I ended up doing 2 internships in the comedy department. I really loved that first year so much. A lot of it, I learned kind of the basics of how do you load comedy in our situation, but even if I was to work in the music department, how you load that material that goes on the air, how do you work with talent, how do you put together imaging, the pieces that you hear in between songs or in between comedy bits. So I learned the basics of my first internship, and I decided to come back for another internship in the comedy department. And by doing that is actually what created my opportunity, because my boss at the time saw that I already had the basics down. He didn't want me just going out and getting coffee. And he had this idea for what he was calling an urban comedy channel, but he didn't want it to be, in his words, the white Irish guy's take on urban comedy, essentially black comedy. So he asked me, could I help him build a demo for this kind of station? And my second internship was basically creating this comedy station from scratch, where we did a 5-minute demo, and then a 15-minute demo, then a half hour, all the way to an hour, where we had the imaging pieces and everything. And at the end of my internship is basically when I finished up that last hour demo. And flash forward to 4 months later, as I was finishing up my finals of my first semester of my senior year, I got a phone call from my old boss saying, Jamie Foxx recently came to Sirius. He is thinking about launching his own comedy channel, and it's really the channel that you already created. So would you like to come back for 3 months as a consultant to help to create this station? No promise of full-time employment afterwards, but I was able to, my senior year, the second semester, that spring semester, to actually go to school and work part-time at Sirius Satellite Radio, creating Jamie Foxx's radio station from scratch. And it just so happened that we launched the station in May 2007. I graduated May 2007, and they hired me full-time May 2007, now as a production coordinator, which was me basically doing really the programming of the music, the comedy, and all that, without the decision-making when it comes to staff. So I was kind of running the day-to-day of the station right out of college.
Talk about parlaying an opportunity and building on it. You're there through the building of Sirius, the war with XM and the merger. You're there to see a lot of growth and change in that industry as a satellite service and how it's impacted radio and then now as podcasts have really grown as a media presence, especially in just strictly speaking of audio platforms like radio and satellite. So can you talk a little bit about how over the last over the 9 years or so that you were there, how you started to a lot of the changes that you saw in the industry and in the technology and in the format and what audiences wanted?
Yeah, so I think part of that is the growth of the company, as you said, that is coupled with what's happening just in the world. So, after my first year being there, the recession hits. The merger of Sirius and XM happened at the same time. There's mass layoffs and literally just kind of for lack of better terms, kind of chaos in the offices of, people not knowing if their job's going to be there the next day or even if their channel's going to be there the next day. And so I think a lot of that kind of changed the culture within the company to being a little bit more safe, whereas before we got to take more risks, try new people on the air. And so it in terms of kind of operating the day-to-day, it kind of changed things, but allowed you to then look at, okay, what's the changing atmosphere and how can I personally take advantage of that? So noticing that there's a lack of voices within the, what I like to call the marginalized communities, the underrepresented space for people of color, for women, the LGBTQ community. I saw that within the company I was working in, but I saw it in the greater media landscape, as you were also saying, with podcasting starting to open up. That again started really primarily white males, white cis males, kind of starting in that arena. And so wanting to create a space within Sirius, but then eventually realizing that, okay, my talents are bigger and my connections are even bigger than what I can do here. I can take this elsewhere and really try to cultivate the kind of network that I want to create. And so that's what started my thinking in terms of creating my own company that could serve as a home and a voice for people of color, for women, those marginalized communities, as I talked about, and also for the staff that supports it. I think it's very important that there's a staff that represents those communities as well that works in those types of programs. And so creating my company could allow me to do just that. But before I fully jumped into that, I felt it was still necessary to work through these other major companies that I worked through. So to continue working at Sirius and climb that ladder and learn a little bit more about how the executive level works. When I made my pivot over to Cadence 13, a podcast company, that was my real foray into the podcast industry and understanding the monetization options there, the different types of content you can do, the nuances to just how creative you can be in that space. And so, I think with all that, obviously the relationships is when I then felt comfortable to go out on my own, because I've developed a knowledge base and also a networking base that allowed me to really step out and feel like I have support and types of hosts to be able to reach out to do the kind of content I want to do.
Right. So your relationships, not just behind the scenes and in the industry, but also with talent and your ability to build a relationship with talent. Has that helped you as you've transitioned to running your own company?
Absolutely. Actually, right when I left Sirius and went to Cadence 13, part of that whole deal is I told Cadence 13, I'm only using you as a stepping stone. I was very honest with them. I said, I'm starting my own company. You're only going to get me for a year to 3 years, and I'm not signing a non-compete. And they said, sure. And so while there, I started getting contacted by people I had been in contact with in my Sirius days, asking to partner with me or for advice. So people like Joy Reid from MSNBC were reaching out to me saying, hey, can you help out with my podcast? I actually had Jamie Foxx reach back out to me to come over and help him develop an idea that he was thinking about. And so I just started to realize my own personal worth at the same time. And wow, these people are coming to me. I'm not even seeking them out. My reputation in this industry must be pretty strong. Now's the right time to step out. And since doing that, now having this network, now having the receipts, showing the kind of shows that we do, the kind of staff that we have on hand, I now have even more people reaching out. Like my hardest job now is telling people no, if we don't have enough resources to take on your show. And some of these people I'm turning away are, B level. I won't say I've turned on any A level, but like B or C, type level celebrities.
Right.
And so that that's a great blessing to have. But that all came from my years in the industry and having integrity at every place I work. Much to what Nicole said as well, like I'd never left any job on bad terms. Even when I left Sirius, they were begging me to stay. They were ready to throw a bag of cash at me because of how I left. And so I think that then allows me to potentially, eventually maybe sell our content to Sirius or sell it to Cadence 13. You don't want to burn those bridges because you never know whether it be the people or the companies that you want to work with later.
I think that's right. Even when you're getting coffee, even when you're, parking somebody's car, hopefully your internships are not that, everybody out there, but even when you are, you're building a reputation, and knowing what you want and knowing what you're willing to do and knowing what you're not willing to do and knowing what you're not willing to tolerate are all important in building those connections and building that relationship with your peers and with your superiors, because eventually, you'll have an opportunity to re-network with them, and they might open doors for you and you might open doors for them. Well, thank you very much, Chris. We've got actually a couple of very specific questions for your industry in the chat already. But before we get to our Q&A, I want to talk to Paul Ward from the class of 1986. Paul is our public relations specialist who's worked in the broadcasting industry for a very long time. Paul, formerly at Nickelodeon, and now is the president of his own company, a consulting firm for PR and brand management. How you doing, Paul? Welcome to our panel today.
I'm doing great, and I've been in it a very long time. I think I'm probably 20 years older than the next panelist. Where would you like me to start? Just sort of, diving in from when I left school?
Well, yeah. So what we're talking about is the beginning of a career, how things get started. And
Sure.
you've been in the industry, like you say, a long time, and you've seen a lot of change. But let's talk a little bit about how you got started and how what brings you, to where we are today.
Sure. I actually did not do an internship when I was at Seton Hall, and I think it hobbled me for the first year and a half or so when I got out of school. So I have 10 brothers and sisters. My parents were just financially strapped, and in order to put myself through school, it was a combination of financial aid, student loans, and waiting tables, which is something I did whenever I wasn't on campus. I would commute back home and wait tables and just kind of save money towards tuition. I was an English major, which was a very difficult degree to market, quite frankly. And what happened was about 6 months after I left Seton Hall, I ended up taking a sales position for Citicorp. And they were starting this money transfer service. And I took that job, and I really did not like it, but it paid really, really well. And I did it for about a year and a half. And then the stock market crashed about a year and a half after I got out of school. And I was one of 25,000 people that were laid off at the same time. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, this is what I've learned since I left college. It's a job is not a 40-hour-a-week thing. It's from the time you go to bed Sunday night to the time you get home Friday night. It's all about work. And I was very dispassionate about the work that I was doing. And so I ended up landing a much lower paying job at a public relations firm in New York that handled all business to business communications. So I handled things like international paper. I had 24 divisions of them as one of my clients. And very serendipitously, the account executive whose job I took ended up leaving his job to go to MTV. I happened to meet him at a cocktail party, and we struck up a conversation. It was very weird that I happened to run into this guy, and we stayed in touch. About maybe 6 months after that, he called me about a job at MTV, and I was dying to work at MTV. And I remember I went for probably 12 interviews, and on the last interview, I was meeting with the head of the department, who I just didn't think I would work well with. He just seemed really condescending, and I said no to the job. And I ended up saying no to the job, and I offered it. I mentioned it to a friend of mine. She ended up getting the job. She was perfect for the position. She loved it. And she said to me, "How could I ever repay you?" I said, "Just keep your ears open." And at the time, MTV, VH1, and Nickelodeon were all together. But I knew I did not want to go to another job that I was going to be miserable at. And she called me about it, several months later, and said, "I threw your hat in the ring. They're looking for a PR guy at Nickelodeon." So I went over to Nickelodeon in August of 1990 and doing public relations. And at the time, it was mostly acquired programming. They would have, shows from Canada, You Can't Do That on television. And they were relying very heavily on Double Dare. But I remember when I got there, I was on a team with a lot of Ivy Leaguers who had all gotten their jobs because daddy knew somebody. And I was the kid from Seton Hall. Half the people didn't even know, had never even heard of Seton Hall. And I remember in the department that I was in, it was somewhat toxic. And I was you know what? I need to rise above the fray and kind of keep my nose to the grindstone and just be the guy. I think Nicole and Gabby, all of the speakers have kind of touched upon this. Be the guy or be the person everybody wants to work with, and everybody feels good, and that you're reliable, and you're trustful, and you're present, and you generate great ideas. And I remember about 2 years into being at Nickelodeon, I got called down to human resources at 10 o'clock in the morning. I had no idea why I was being called down there, and I sat there for hours, and I was just really sweating profusely, and I was what is going on? They made me sit there for 6 hours. Work was piling up back at my desk. And at the end of the day, they called me in and they said, listen, the Jerry Laybourne, who was the president of Nickelodeon, wants to redo things. She's fired the entire department except for you. Congratulations, you got promoted. And it was just sort of, it was one of those like early learning things. And that led to great opportunity. So I was, as a PR guy, I was responsible for launching, now I'm really showing my age. I launched Rugrats, Ren and Stimpy, Doug, Nick News, the Kids' Choice Awards. I worked on all of these iconic shows. And then eventually they asked me to kind of bring my sensibility to Nick at Night as well. And, you know, my career took a very interesting twist because I'm always, I mentioned, you know, to you earlier, Manny, that, you know, I always have a bucket list. And on my bucket list, it was to do stand-up comedy. I signed up for the stand-up comedy course. I happened to mention it to a few people in my department. Word spread like wildfire. And the night I had to do my 5-minute set, there were hundreds of people there. And then word got back at Viacom. And the president of Nickelodeon called me down and he said, I'm being honored by the Boston College Alumni Association. I want you to warm up the crowd. And I said, okay. And then after I said yes, I found out it was 700 people and I was terrified. But I got on the phone with BC and I crafted an entire stand-up routine about Boston College. And it went over very well, to the point where like the priest who was the president of BC said to me afterwards, that was great, Paul. What year did you graduate from BC? I said, sorry, Father, you know, Seton Hall, 86. But what happened was all of the Viacom executives that my boss reported to were there. And they would routinely call on me to help them craft factual business communications that had a layer of funny in it. And, you know, Chris, one of your old bosses, Mel Karmazin, was a frequent collaborator of mine. And so the idea of like of doing communications and PR and marrying it with a sense of humor, you know, really helped me immeasurably. So, you know, that's kind of how my career took off. But it was, you know, again, it was like it was being present. It was staying below the toxicity as much as I could, being a nice guy, just to, you know, not just because you never know, just because it was like, that's just my personality. And I think that, you know, when it comes down to, are we going to take, you know, Paul, are we going to take Shirley, are we going to take Abraham? You know, you want to be the person that everybody wants to work with. And that sort of helped me immeasurably.
Very good. That's really touched on a lot of great themes there that I think are going to be valuable to people as they're starting their careers, both as interns and young professionals. Be the person other people want to work with. Will never ever go wrong. And using your own personality and your own best traits to create professional opportunities, I think, is something that can also translate to a lot of people's careers. Thank you very much, Paul. We have some questions for you as well in the chat. That we've just about hit the hour mark, and I'm grateful to everybody for being with us today in today's program. I'd like to start our Q&A with some questions from our audience. We've got a lot of questions, so I'm going to try to get through as many of them as we can. Please, for panelists and audience members, stick around as long as you want. To our panel, if you want to answer a question, feel free to unmute yourself. I'll try to direct them when they're specific, but if they're for the panel, whoever wants to answer one, certainly we want to hear your answer. Let's start with this question comes from Ronnie, and Ronnie asks, how much pressure is there to not commit mistakes, and how do you combat that pressure? So regardless of industry, we're facing high stakes even at an entry-level position. So how much pressure is there to not commit mistakes, and how do you combat that pressure?
I can jump in on that one. Oh, okay. So for me, and this is the same philosophy I have with my employees, my staff. I don't have a problem with mistakes the first time, especially if someone's new. I think there's less of a pressure of making mistakes. Obviously, you know, there's egregious ones like, you know, if your boss tells you to do something, don't make the mistake that he told you not to do. But it's the repeating of mistakes that's the problem. Once you start repeating mistakes, that shows that you don't care. It shows that you're not paying attention. And so that's always a philosophy that I've taken for myself and for others, is as long as you're making a mistake and you're learning from it, then all is well.
That's a good approach.
I could jump in there too if you want.
Mm-hmm.
being on a film set is a very high stakes situation, right? Time is money, right? You always hear that, and it's easy to get swept up in the pressure of Manny, you know this being on sets too. It's the pressure of, if we don't get this shot right this minute, everything is going to fall down and crash and burn. Everyone loses their job. You're never going to work again in the industry. And it's just not true. It's just absolutely not true. There are days that the sun sets faster than you wanted it to, and we just can't get all the shots we wanted, and you just move on. We're not, doing brain surgery here. We're making television, we're making TV shows, we're making movies, right? And we're going to take it seriously, and you do your work hard. You work hard and do the best job you can, but don't think for a second that your life is going to come crumbling down if you make a mistake and you let that one pedestrian walk through the shot in the background. Like, no one cares. Do your job the best you can, but move on after a mistake is made. Move on and keep doing what you're trained to do.
Because I will also add that you don't want to be so scared to make mistakes that you don't make any moves at all, because that's not the person that anyone wants on the team either. So you want to make sure that you're making decisions based on all the information you have. You're making the best decision you can. And if it's a mistake, you're going to learn from it, and you're going to learn a lot from it. But you also don't want to be the person who's scared to make mistakes, because then you'll look passive and you won't be somebody that other people want on the team either.
Right. Can I just say also, I think that the owning the mistake is the biggest thing you can do. And, rather than just try to assign blame to somebody else, if it's the mistake that you made, the sooner you own it, the sooner it's behind you. To Chris's point, learn from that mistake, try not to make that again. And I believe, Gabby may have said it a little bit earlier in terms of just being be solution oriented. If you made a mistake, go to your boss and say, you know what, I screwed up, I made a mistake, and here's how I think we might be able to fix it. Sometimes you might not have the answer, but you should always try to go to anytime you go to your supervisor with a problem, if you've got some sort of solution in hand, you'll be that much better off. But nobody's expecting perfection, but just learn from your mistakes.
Right. I think you're talking about two very distinct things too: problems and mistakes. With the people that I work with, if there's a problem, I'd like to hear about it right away. And yeah, if you can come in with a solution, it's better to come in with a whole thing and not half a thing. But with a mistake too, the clock starts as soon as something happens. So for me, it's always been the first response is, great, how much time do we have to fix it? So the more time you can give to fix a thing, you got to get over the embarrassment or the potential embarrassment that you're worried about and start solving the mistake or start solving the problem right away. Thank you, guys. Our next question is something that's very topical right now. Obviously, in the time of this pandemic, so many things are on hold. So many things have adjusted how they're producing, how media is being produced. So a question for our whole panel, what is your best advice for graduates of 2020 and students starting their careers who need to do their networking virtually, who are getting their careers started virtually? This is obviously unprecedented, but we've had times of various types of disruptions to the industry, and this is a different scale, but certainly show business is still going. So let's talk a little bit about advice for grads who are starting their careers now virtually.
I'd like to jump in if I can and just highlight one program that I know of. It's called the Made in New York program. It's basically a school. It's a program that you learn how to be a PA, basically, for New York film production, and it's very centered on diverse admissions, people from all different walks of life, people of color, women, whoever. Everybody is welcome, and I actually had an experience with them. I didn't personally go through the program, but I was working on set at SVU, Law and Order, and a fellow alumni from Seton Hall who I knew was there on the day, and I it was a surprise. I said, "It was so great to see you. How'd you get here? You know, like I didn't know you were even looking for this kind of work." And he said, "The Made in New York program. You go through this thing. They learn you all the steps, basically how to be a PA, and at the end, they help try to place you in as a PA on sets. And so that's a great like entry level for everyone to learn, you know, how to be a PA and how to get on your first film set, basically. So I don't know if I don't know what they're doing right now during the time of COVID or as things are being shut down, but get on their radar is what I would say. Go to their website, find out when they're starting to do these kind of things that you can sign up for and get involved as soon as possible, because it's a great program, and you'll see it often on the end of credits in movies. You'll see a little Made in New York sticker. Mm-hmm. It's because we shot it in New York, and this program is it's their program, so it's well worth your time. So get involved in it.
The Made in NY program, it's run out of the mayor's office for film and television in New York City. So I don't have the URL for that, but if you just Google Made in NY program film or mayor's office for film and TV, you should be able to find out what Danny's referring to here. Anybody else?
I would just say 3 very quick things.
Sure.
There is the Junior Hollywood Radio and Television Society. It's a networking program that does virtual event mixers. There's panels. It's great to build your network from scratch. The second thing is, now that everybody's home, ask for informational interviews. Don't ask for job-seeking interviews. Ask people, hey, I want to sit down for 10 to 15 minutes. I just want to ask you how you got started. I want to ask you about things that I can do better to expand upon my resume. People love what we're talking about right now. We love talking about our careers and how we got started. So if you position a conversation away, I'm not looking for a job. I just want to learn more about you and how you got started. They're going to talk. The third and most important thing, look for the emblem. A pirate, a fellow pirate, will always help out another pirate. So even if you feel a little bit discouraged, you're trying to build your network base, you don't know how to do it, the alumni program here is expansive. Or from the CHAMP program to the Theater and the Arts program, the pirates will help their own. We always look for what year you graduated, and if you're part of the family, start there, because there are so many people in a huge class of different fields that I remember talking to somebody in the nursing program back in the day that had nothing to do with entertainment, but it was a fruitful connection that I made because it led to something for my career down the line. So look for the pirates. They're always there.
Thank you, Mike. One thing I'll say out here, all of our panelists today are all on LinkedIn, among many other places. So you can feel free to reach out to our panelists today via that platform, and you can also contact our Career Center at careers@shu.edu if you want to stay in touch with us and to find out about other internship fairs and job fairs and so on. Nicole, you wanted to answer that question as well.
Yeah, the other thing I wanted to say is that there's 2 daytime talk shows starting up in New York this year, which is just something to always keep on your radar too. If that's something you want to get into, Nick Cannon is shooting in New York, and so is the Drew Barrymore show. So, you know, they're probably looking for positions too. So that's a great place to look to, as the shows that are starting up, because even if you take a job as an intern right now, you know, it'd probably only be 6 months until you led to a full-time job. So I also suggest maybe having to step down right now because positions are smaller, but it could lead to something bigger.
Gabby. Oh, you're muted.
Got it. Okay. I just wanted to say right now, TV pretty much is shut down, and that means people are on their computers, and if I'd be sending out resumes left and right. I would use this COVID to update your resume, make sure it's perfect, and start sending away, because people are actually taking time to sit at their computers and they're looking. And I think a ton of companies are probably doing virtual interviews right now. And I think a lot of shows, the shooting schedule does wrap in April and May, and then they staff up for the fall. So I think it's actually a great time to, you know, it's shut down, but I think it could be beneficial because people are slowing down for a minute, and it's going to start back up soon. So I think it's a great time to really get your resume out, really try and contact whoever you can and ask for a virtual interview, because you don't know when in-person ones are going to start back up again. But I think if you suggest a virtual one, it's pretty easy. And I think right now is a really great time while everybody has a little bit of downtime to perfect your resume and send it out.
Mm-hmm. That's right on. Does anybody else want to add to that topic? Yeah, Paul.
Yeah, I was going to well, first of all, I think that for any students that are on this call today, the presence here suggests that they're pretty serious about their career aspirations. Do not overlook the Career Center. It's really like, an incredible resource. And this is the most uncertain time in generations. And I think that if you're currently a student or if you're a recent graduate, you're going to have a tough going and you need everything in your toolkit. But I also think that you need to be nimble and you need to flex. And so, don't think so linear about like, I want to go into TV or I want to go into film production. I guess, sure, if you want to work in editing and things like that, other opportunities are out there, and they're just exploding all over the digital universe because, like, even if you're Weight Watchers or any company, you're really relying on digital for storytelling. And so that's really it. It's like, everybody's trying to get their brand messages across, and they want to know that you can tell a story. Like, when you go to a television network or if you're going to go work on a daytime series, it's all about like crafting the story. And I think that other opportunities are out there. My son is going to be a junior at the University of Delaware. He was very upset. He had an internship for Turner Sports, and they shuttered the internship program for the summer. And I'll tell you what, now he's down in Delaware at he's doing marketing for a scientific company. He's still learning marketing. He's still learning all the fundamentals of marketing. And I just think that we all just need to adapt in like a big way. And to that, and really for students, open up the aperture a little bit and really think like so much of like, all right, maybe Regis and Kelly isn't hiring right, or Kelly and Ryan, sorry, maybe they're not hiring right now, but there are other opportunities that are exploding elsewhere.
That's right. That's right. Thank you, Paul. And I want to thank all of our panelists who've joined us today. We're going to end there. Just a reminder for everyone in the audience that the Career Center is here to help. So you can visit shu.edu/career-center or email at careers@shu.edu to find out more about upcoming opportunities. Once again, I want to thank our panelists, Mike Maniaci, Gabby Utermark, Nicole Romanella O'Neill, Danny Schock, Chris Colbert, and Paul Ward for joining us today. Thank you all very, very much, and be safe and good luck. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
See ya.
Thank you.
Go Pirates.
Go Pirates.